Hi there, students. I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, because that's what I am. I'm a Puppy-Sensei VTuber and I make Japanese language lessons to help level up your abilities. Well, listen, I have some bad news. Um, hmm. So it turns out that our classroom is not going to be repaired anytime soon. Seems that the pipes under the radiator were busted like ages ago and nobody ever replaced them. Also, when I told them about the ghost, they said that I was just making it up, and I don't know. They said that it was just bound to happen eventually, and they just ignored me when I was telling them that it was because of a ghost. The good news, though, is that Puppy Koi is starting to act normally again. I suspect that ghost was maybe possessing him or something. Eh. So yeah, sadly we have no classroom this week. But the good news is that the AV Club offered me a workaround, and I happily took them up on the offer. It's a little weird. It's not ideal, but I think it's a happy compromise. Anyway, regardless, I'm gonna be super happy to be able to spend some time with you, and we'll make through it, right? It doesn't matter where we have class, just that we have class. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the te form in Japanese. The te form, sometimes called the continuative form, allows you to do a lot of really handy things. It's a verb conjugation, and it has some unique rules. We're going to go over things very carefully together. Sound good? Good. Let's get into it. Ikimashou! Hi, hi there, students. I told you I was getting a new model. Do you like it? No, no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. This isn't my new model. I promise this is all going to make sense next week, but for today, what I wanted to do was talk to you a little bit about the te form in Japanese. I guess we should start with a simple definition of sorts. Basically, the te form is going to be used to link things together in Japanese. There are various things that we can link, and that's going to have various effects on our sentences. For our purposes, this week's lesson is going to be a two-parter. This week, I'm going to teach you the basics for how you go about creating the te form in some different environments. In next week's lesson, I'm going to offer you some real-world applications for the te form that will really help you better understand some of the niche cases where the te form is going to come in handy for us. So first and foremost, what are the environments where we find the te form? Basically, it's this. We're going to see the te form taking shape in all kinds of verbs, and also in e-adjectives and in na-adjectives, and those are those adjectives that we know to be noun-like, and also in nouns themselves. That's a lot for us to cover, and so we're going to breeze through it today so that next week we can focus on uses and real-life syntax examples. So let's start with making the te form of ichidan verbs. We have here taberu, and we're turning it into tabete. Creating the te form for an ichidan verb is pretty easy. Once we know the dictionary form of the verb, and that will be the form of the verb that ends in ru, all we have to do is drop the ru and add te. For ichidan verbs, the part without the ru, as in taberu minus ru, basically just that tabe part, that part is called the verb stem. It is not the dictionary form, because you really don't use the verb stem of an ichidan verb for anything without first attaching something to the end. This te that we're learning today is just one of the things that you can attach to the end of a verb to create a longer form of a various type of verb, right? The stem, however, is really handy to know. But for ichidan verbs, you can kind of always work your way backward to find it, so you don't necessarily need to memorize every verb stem, right? Let's take a look at taberu for just a moment, and I'm going to show you what I mean, right? So in these examples, I have taberu, which means I eat, in the plain form. I have tabeta, which means I ate, in the plain form. I have tabemasu, meaning I eat, in the polite form. Tabemashita, meaning I ate, in the polite form. And I have tabetakunai, which means I don't want to eat. Now all of these, just by working backward, we can knock off the end, and we're going to end up at the same verb stem, that tabe, right? They all start with tabe, and they have some kind of ending that gives us other meanings. Maybe it's tense, maybe it's a politeness, right? Whatever it is that we get from it, that's where we're getting it. The verb stem, always the same. What I want you to understand is that we can always work backward to find the stem of the verb, regardless what form that verb might be in, right? It's really helpful for us to know the possible verb endings in Japanese, because that really helps us determine what we can immediately just knock off. But maybe you're starting with a verb that you don't know. You want to find the stem, but you don't know this verb, and maybe you don't know the ending either. You can always kind of think about working from the very last hiragana you see, and then moving backward until you hit the kanji. For most verbs, your verb stem is probably either going to be just that kanji, or maybe that kanji plus the next hiragana, right? Just as we see this example here with tabe. Now, that's not an exact science. It's not going to work every single time, but most of the time you can kind of find the place where it feels natural to knock something off and end up at the verb stem. And like I said, being at the verb stem is really handy because that means that you know exactly how to make the te form, because the te form is just the stem plus te. Just like taberu becomes tabete. Tabe is the verb stem plus te, you get tabete, which is the continuative form of the verb to eat. So you're saying basically, I eat and something else. But we'll talk more about that next week. Really, for any ichidan verb, if we have the stem, we can automatically make the te form. And that's because the te form really just links onto the end of the stem, and basically just like that, we've gotten to the te form of the verb. Easy. Okay, so I've given some examples here. Miru is a verb meaning to see. Miru is going to become mite, and it does this by dropping the ru and adding te. So miru becomes mite. Deru means to go out. Minus the ru, add te, we get dette. Ne? And then nameru is going to become namete. Drop the ru, add te. It's very easy. Yeah? So, ichidan verbs, easy. But unfortunately, this same process with godan verbs, you're going to see that it's going to get a little bit harder, right? And we kind of knew that this was coming because we've talked about godan verbs before, and we know that, in fact, they're called godan verbs because they take 5 different kind of stages or levels or sounds that they're going to end up making, particularly in that last syllable, right? And that's okay, because what we're going to see today, there are going to be some handy little tips that we'll be able to get through. So, forming the te form of a godan verb. For a godan verb, like nomu that we have here, we're going to try to get to nonde. Creating that te form, it's going to be just a little bit more tricky. You can already tell it doesn't end in te. It's called the te form, but it ends in de for some godan verbs, but not all godan verbs. But how do we get there? The good news is this. Basically, if you already know how to form the plain past godan verb, then making the te form is pretty much the exact same process. So if you can form nonda out of nomu, so nomu means to drink, nonda means drank in the plain past. If you know how to do that, then you can make the te form. We've talked about this before, but creating the da form, the plain past form of a godon verb, usually involves a process similar to this. You need to conjugate the verb so that it's able to take that da ending sound. Now, depending on the ending sound of the base verb, your plain past verb is going to take one of a couple different forms, right? And that'll change based on the sound at the end of your verb. For a verb like nomu that ends in a mu sound, for example, you're going to end up with an nda ending, and that's to form the plain past, like nomu and nonda, right? You're going to see that the te form follows exactly this same pattern, except instead of ending with da, here it ends with de. So nomu becomes nonda. In the te form, nomu becomes nonde. The only difference here is that da and de are different. One is da and the other is de, as you can probably tell. But as you can see, the process is the same. Forming the te form follows the same rules as the da form for the purposes of conjugation, and it always will for any verb. If you can make the da, you can make the de. So, if you can form the past plain form of a godon verb, then you can always form the te form. Easy, easy. I suppose you might have a question, and you might be wondering at this point whether the te form is plain, or polite, or present, or past. And the answer is no. No. It's not. It's not any of those. The te form of a verb won't be providing your sentence with any notable markers of either tense or politeness. And that's because the tense and the politeness are definitely both going to be coming later in the sentence. Again, I'm going to go into more specifics in my next video, but basically the te form is a linking form that allows you to say things like doing this verb and also doing this verb and also doing this verb. For that reason, your tense and your other grammatical factors are going to end up being attached to the final verb in the verbal compound. And then whatever tense that is in the final verb, that tense is going to scope over the entire verbal component of the sentence. So if you had, I ran and I jumped and I fell into a puddle, right? Then in Japanese, the tense on the last verb scopes over all of the other ones. In English, we have to make that change for every verb. In Japanese, you don't, right? It's just verb, verb, verb with tense at the end. I promise that these things are going to make sense in time, and I'm probably not doing a very good job explaining it right now, but that's because I intend to explain it much more in my next video. There is a madness to my method. Wait. No, wait. Reverse that. Okay, so let's look at the other options that we have for godon verbs so that we can conjugate any godon verb into the te form. Now, again, we've talked about this before, but these godon forms are only predictable within their own little niche. Do you understand my meaning? All godon verbs that end in su will conjugate to shite, just like hanasu becomes hanashite, right? We see that right there at the bottom. That's the example. Hanasu becomes hanashite. So any godon verb that ends in su is going to conjugate that exact same way. It ends in su, it's going to become shite, just like hanashite, right? And if it ends in mu, like tanomu, then that's going to become an nde sound. So tanomu becomes tanonde. Bu, godan verbs, will also become nde, just like asobu becomes asonde. If it ends in gu, it's going to conjugate to ide, as in oyoide from oyogu. A godan verb ending in ku will conjugate to ite, so kiku becomes kite. Careful, it's not kite, it's kite, so you have to stay on that I just a little bit longer. And lastly, godan verbs that end in u, tsu, or ru, as long as that's a godan verb and not an ichidan verb. Remember, some godan verbs end in ru, but most verbs that end in ru are ichidan verbs. Anyway, all of those that end in u, tsu, and the godan ru verbs are all going to end in that small tsu plus te sound to make the te form. So arau becomes aratte. Soratsu becomes soratte. And katamaru becomes katamatte. And if you like video games, you might remember where katamaru comes from. And maybe you don't. That's up to you. Unfortunately, just like the plain past form, you really just kind of have to be ready to memorize these forms, right? They're only predictable within their niche. They're only predictable within the same sound pattern. So all verbs that end in u will conjugate the same way with that te, right? The small tsu te. But you can't really otherwise kind of predict how it's going to conjugate. There's just kind of no rhyme or reason for it, and you just have to memorize it, unfortunately. So, the good news is that we are halfway there. We still need to cover irregular verbs, e-adjectives, and na-adjectives. So, for our two irregular verbs, we're just going to have to memorize these te forms. Luckily, they're pretty easy. For our regular verbs, suru and kuru, suru is going to become shite in the te form, and kuru is going to become kite in the te form. I keep saying this over and over, but eventually I promise we're going to figure out why these are called irregular verbs. The te form acts exactly the same way as the ta form of these two. So once again, they're easy and they're not out there to trick us yet. But they are lulling you into a false sense of security, and I can promise you that. We are definitely going to see them get sneaky on us, but for now, we can just be happy that these irregular forms are kind of behaving kindly for us, right? So, suru, shite, kuru, kite. Easy. Okay, great. That's out of the way. Now, we need to be able to handle the te form of e-adjectives. I know, Manager-sama, I know. It feels backward, right? What I'm doing feels backward. I'm teaching you all of these conjugations today, and you don't really understand fully why. I want to demystify that just a little bit. Again, I'm going to spend much more time next lesson talking about the purpose behind the te form. But what I will tell you right now is that we can always use the te form to make sequential lists of verbs or lists of adjectives. Well, you see, in Japanese, word order isn't usually all that important. But the te form is one of those standout cases where it kinda is. If we have a sequence of verbs in the te form, they're one after another, and it kind of creates a situation where you did this, and then you did this, and then you did this. So to give an example, if I wrote a sentence in English like, I boiled water, I put noodles in the pot, and I heated them up. That creates a sequence, and it does the same thing in Japanese. So we're going to follow that sequence using the te form. Now, that sequencing is not as important when we're linking adjectives, but nevertheless, we can still use adjectives in the te form to describe some noun. We just give it multiple qualities, right? So it's a blue car, but it's also a nice blue car, right? Yeah, yeah. And modest. Don't forget modest. You're also modest. Anyway, using the te form of an adjective, we can create longer and longer lists of adjectives that all work to modify the same noun. Just like, メネジ様は頭が良くて面白くてかっこいいです. See, what we're seeing here is that we can use the te form with adjectives to form chains of adjectives. And what I want to remind you is that at the grammatical level, what we're really doing is creating one large noun phrase where each individual part of the noun phrase is all true. And this is also going to hold whether we're using those adjectives in the post-nominal position, just like we've done in the previous sentence, or if we use those adjectives before a noun to describe something using multiple adjectives, right? So we could also have a sentence like this. 東京は忙しくて高くて素晴らしいところです. What I want to highlight here is that we've created the phrase 忙しくて高くて素晴らしいところ. And technically, that's all one long noun phrase. It's a busy, expensive, splendid place. All these things end up getting linked together. And that's because they're all descriptions within the same noun phrase. Again, I'm going to talk more about the linking aspect of this te form in my next lesson, but I thought it was important to lay the groundwork for the handiwork that this grammar pattern is going to be able to accomplish for us in time. For now, though, we've already seen 4 e adjectives in the te form, so let's look at them very closely. We have takai, which means high or expensive, and in the te form, that's going to become takakute. We have isogashi, which is busy, right? And in the te form, that's isogashikute. Omoshiroi means like funny or interesting, and it's going to become omoshirokute. Ne? And atama ga ii, meaning smart, will become atama ga yokute. You can already see that conjugating e adjectives into the te form requires one tiny, extra, little itty-bitty step when we compare it to conjugating verbs. Basically, if you have the base e adjective, the form that ends in e, you're going to drop that last e sound, and it's going to become a ku sound before you add the te. The ku is the same ku that we've previously seen in negative forms of e adjectives too, just like oishi can become oishikunai. Technically, that ku form would be referred to as the renyoke form in Japanese grammar, but that isn't a term that you need to memorize or anything. It's basically just the form of the adjective that's ready to take on a suffix like te or nai. We already know how to handle literally any e adjective now, right? Any e adjective minus the e plus ku plus te equals the te form of any e adjective. See, it's simple. It really is that easy. If you know the base form of the adjective, you've already got all the tools that you need to be able to conjugate that adjective into the te form. Easy, right? Yeah, with the exception of e. See, the base form of e, the adjective meaning good, is actually yoi. It's really the only weird e adjective, and really that's just because of sound change over time. Over time, e became easier to say than yoi. And you know, describing things as good is really common. It's something that we do all the time. And so over time, saying yoi, 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 right? It just slowly changed over time until eventually it became e. But unfortunately, when we conjugate e, it needs to revert back to that yo sound because ikute is already something totally different, right? And so it can't occupy that same spot. It needs to become yokute. But that's it for E adjectives. That's really all we need to know. We only need to know the one weird one, and then all of the rest of them really will conjugate that easily. Drop the E, add ku, add te, and we're done. So now we'll move on to na adjectives. Get ready, okay? Na adjectives, they're really tough, and I want to prepare you. I'm mentally giving you a hug right now. Na adjectives are kind of like nouns, right? What do we know about nouns? They don't conjugate. And na adjectives, they're like nouns. They behave like nouns. And so, they don't conjugate. Nouns don't conjugate. Na adjectives don't conjugate. But that doesn't mean that na adjectives and nouns don't get to take part in the fun that is the te form. And so how do we do it? You just add de. Basically, for any na adjective or for any noun, you can put them into the linking form simply by adding de to the end. And that's it. You're done. No conjugation, nothing needed, no changes. You just add de. Why is it de and not te? Because na adjectives and nouns had to go and be all weird. I'll explain more about why we use the te form with nouns in the next lesson, but I want to highlight something really important very quickly, and that's the fact that just because we have e adjectives that conjugate into the te form one way, and na adjectives that conjugate into the te form a different way, that does not mean that we cannot mix and match e and na adjectives to link something together into the same sentence and describe the same noun. So let's take a look at an example sentence here. このラーメンは辛くなくて新鮮で安い食材があります. Ha, I threw a curveball at you here, but this is a good challenge. Challenge. The ingredients that I've described in this sentence are karakunai. Karakunai. Karakunai means not spicy. That's karai, which is the word for spicy, in the nai form. And to form the nai form of an e adjective, we drop the e and add ku and then add nai. So we go from karai to karakunai. Karakunai. And that forms the nai form of karai, meaning not spicy. But anything that ends in nai becomes a new e adjective, right? The new e adjective made by karakunai just means not spicy, and any new e adjective made by adding nai just means not that thing. A na adjective, then we can put that into the te form. We're going to do that by once again dropping the e, adding ku, and then adding te. And so we end up with karakunakute, right? Karakunai in the te form. Karakunakute. Not spicy. It's not spicy in the te form, so that it can be followed by shinsen. Shinsen means fresh. It's a na adjective, and we want to put that in the te form, and that's very easy for na adjectives because we just add de, right? So that's shinsen de. Ne? So we get karakunakute shinsen de, and then we're just adding yasui, ne? For inexpensive. And that's how we're going to describe the ingredients, as not spicy, as fresh, and as cheap. So all told, in the end, we get a single noun phrase that's like karakunakute shinsen de yasui shokuzai. Ingredients which are not spicy, are fresh, and are inexpensive. See? Linking things together to form longer phrases. It's not that difficult. Let's test your knowledge with a quiz. 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 This week's quiz is going to be pretty straightforward. All I really want from you today is just to conjugate some items to and from the te form. Yes, to and from. So I'm going to give you some items, and I want you to conjugate them into the te form, but I'm also going to give you some things that I want you to take from the te form and bring them back into a different form. So they'll already be conjugated into te, and you just put them into a different form. Okay? The trick is that I want you to figure out on your own what the actual grammatical forms are. I'm not going to tell you if it's an ichidan verb or a na adjective or whatever. You're going to have to figure that out on your own and then conjugate it or deconjugate it. I don't know about that. Anyway, let's try and see how well you do, okay? So to start, number 1, please conjugate konomu into the te form. Exactly what it says on the tin. No multiple choice this week, okay? Just shout it out at the screen. I'm surely going to hear you. So what's konomu in the te form? Did you figure it out? Konomu must be a godan verb. We know that, right? Because it ends in mu and not in ru. So to form the te form, we need to change mu into nde. Just like in the da form, the plain past form, konomu would become kononda, and in the te form, it becomes kononde. Easy, right? Uh-oh. Is this one difficult? This one might be difficult. I'm not sure if this is difficult or not. Can you conjugate muzukashi into the te form? Hey, it was difficult. By which I mean it was muzukashi, the Japanese word for difficult. That's an e adjective, so we end up with muzukashikute, ne? We're just dropping the e and we're adding ku and then we're adding te. All right, this next one, can you please help me with this? Can you conjugate taskeru into the te form? Taskete! Oh, no. I mean they conjugated taskeru into the te form, and so we get taskete. Okay, one more like this. This word is majime. If you don't know, that means something like serious or diligent. Can you put this into the te form for me? It's a na adjective, right? There was no hiragana there, so there was nothing to conjugate. For na adjectives and nouns, creating the te form is as simple as adding de to the end. Boom. Okay, so for these next few questions, you're going to do the opposite. I'm going to give you the te form, and I'm going to ask you to revert it back to a previous conjugation form. In this case, you're looking for the stem. Remember, the stem is not the dictionary form. It's like the dictionary form with something else missing. This might not be easy, but do your best, okay? Was this tough? The stem of fuyashite is just fuya. The dictionary form would be fuyasu, which is a verb meaning to increase. This is a godan verb, and so that's why it's going to be pulled back to fuya, right? That's how we find the stem. Remember what I said about working backward? It's not a perfect science, but yeah, it tends to work most of the time. Okay, next one. Do you recognize kite? I hope so. It should be easy to find the dictionary form, I hope. Remember, the dictionary form will end in some kind of oo sound, assuming that this is a verb. You know, lol. It's kuru, right? That's one of our irregular verbs. Hopefully you remembered. Whoo, okay. I made this one tough. I'm looking for the base word. This word has gone through 2 conjugations. It's in the te form, but also something else has been done to it. Can you strip off both of those conjugations and find the base word underneath? It's probably one you know. Kawaii! It's an e adjective, and it's been conjugated into the negative form, kawaii kunai. But then after that, it was also conjugated into the te form, which gave us kawaii kunakute. Ne? Kawaii kunakute. Or not cute in the te form, kawaii kunakute. Ne? The base word is kawaii, which is an e adjective, and of course it means cute. That's it. 7 questions. Was it very painful? I hope not, because I do want to give you homework. Although I have to say, I really do feel bad about this because I know it's almost a holiday, so I regret giving you homework, but I want to, and so I'm going to. Anyway, let's see how you do on it, okay? So here's a Japanese sentence, right? I'm not going to read it for you, I'm just going to display it, and it is for you to figure out. Your task is just to give me a good translation in English for this sentence. Or you can translate it into a different language if you want. I probably won't be able to read it. You could put it into Chinese and then maybe I could read it. You could put it into German and then I could probably read a bit of it. But, you know, that English is also fine. Whatever. Can you come up with a good English or other languages sentence that captures the meaning of the Japanese here? You can post it as a reply to this video. Just do your best. I'll be here supporting you always. If you have questions or if you need anything, just reach out, okay? And I'm proud of you for trying. And I'm proud of you for being here, because you're just wonderful. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. There are some big things coming soon. Maybe you've already seen my news on Blue Sky and that other place. So yeah, new things are coming, changes are coming, and change is good, I promise. I'm personally very excited for the things that I have going on in my future. It makes me really happy to be able to reach so many of you, and the kind and supportive and frankly inspirational interactions that I've had with a lot of you practically every day. It makes me feel all warm inside. Good timing, too, because the weather is finally starting to get colder here. And by colder, I mean just a little bit colder. I want snow. Why can't I just have snow? It's so unfair. Give me snow. Oh man. Anyway, next week we'll do an even deeper look into the te form, and I'll talk more about creating verbal suffixes using this grammar pattern. I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully you'll learn a lot. Also, since it's the holiday season, please have a peaceful and comforting time this week. Remember, you're special and you're lovely. I accept you. You are welcome here. I know a lot of people this time of year can kind of start to feel down. There are a lot of people who don't have a loving family, people who have been rejected by their loved ones, people who are living with grief. Just know that this little dog loves you. Maybe it's not much, but if you don't have a family of your own that you can celebrate with this year, then I'd like you to consider yourself part of our community. We'll be your found family, and we'll take you in, and we'll love you because you deserve it. I'll see you next week for the Christmas episode, holiday episode, Hanukkah episode, year-end party. In Japanese, a year-end party is a bonenkai. Anyway, I'll see you then, okay? Mata ne!